Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to the Police Accountability Report. As I never get tired of saying, the point of the show is to hold the politically powerful institution of policing accountable. But we don't just do this by focusing on the bad behavior of individual cops. Instead, we examine the system that makes bad policing possible. And this week, we're going to achieve this goal by making a comparison between how our so-called justice system treats two distinct crimes. One, by powerful investment bankers, and the other, by a man holding a sign. But before I get started, I want you watching to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct, please email it to us privately at par@therealnews.com, and we might be able to investigate. And please like, share, and comment on our videos. It really does help us. And you know I read your comments and appreciate them. And of course, you can message me directly at Tayas Baltimore on Facebook or Twitter. Now, if there is one thing about the American justice system that has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, is that we have a penchant for locking people up. By now, almost everyone is familiar with the statistics. The United States has 5% of the world's population, yet we house 25% of our planet's prisoners. We have an incarceration rate that is multiple times higher than China or Russia. Both countries are not exactly known for humanitarian policies. But the reason I raise this fact is to make a point, not just about how many people we house behind bars, but how selective that process actually is. Case in point is the heavily touted recent settlement, and I emphasize the word settlement to make a point, with the investment bank Goldman Sachs. You remember Goldman, the investment firm that sold faulty mortgage-backed securities that contributed in part to the 2008 financial crisis, then got a bailout, then gave a fat bonus to the same people who caused the problem in the first place. Well, it turns out that the Great Recession was just a warm-up for these pillars of capitalism. In fact, shortly after they collected the bailout from your tax dollars, the ingenious investment gurus launched another money-making scheme that is detailed in this recent settlement with the U.S. Department of Justice. What brought this agreement to our attention is not the amount in penalties Goldman was forced to pay. No, even though the firm had to shell out $2.9 billion to avoid criminal prosecution, that's not what makes these crimes worthy of your time. It wasn't even the scheme, which involved bribing officials of Malaysia, that Goldman Sachs fleeced so they could earn $600 million in ill-gotten gains for selling fraudulent bonds. It wasn't even the size of the fraud that made this story worth telling. No, it was the document we're showing now that we felt compelled to share on this show. What you're seeing is the actual charges against the Goldman executives, and what they reveal isn't just the details of the brazen scheme to break the law and deceive investors, but also just how disparate our justice system treats the crimes of the uber rich versus the rest of us. And to help me delve into the details, I'm joined by my reporting partner, Stephenjanis. Stephen, thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Stephen, you've been reviewing the settlement. Can you talk a little bit about the allegations against Goldman Sachs?
Well, basically, the entire company, or at least the top management, worked in concert with people who were of questionable, sort of character to coordinate this international scheme to defraud the people of Malaysia by bribing public officials so that they could sell bonds that were basically BS and collect $600 million. So it was a huge concerted crime that used the stock market, used bond trading markets, used all these sort of financial tools of capitalism to exploit and rip off an entire nation.
So there is one glaring omission from the documents. Can you talk about that?
Well, unlike people that they put up in, when someone commits a crime here where they put their mugshot on TV, the only indication that Goldman employees were involved, they use things like employee number one, employee number two. They actually keep them secret and anonymous, even though they were part of an international conspiracy and crime, which is something that's not afforded to the regular Joe who gets arrested here and is quickly put on TV, even though they haven't had a trial. These people are guilty and their names are kept secret.
Now, this scheme had real repercussions for the people who could least afford it. Can you talk about that?
Well, the thing is that generally speaking, Goldman Sachs has used Wall Street, has used federal government money, bailout money to enrich themselves and have ripped off, basically the taxpayers of this country. They ripped off the people of Malaysia. They ripped off basically federal regulators. They have ripped off everyone in their basic sphere and have not suffered any consequences. As you pointed out, the amount of money they're paying is nothing for this firm that is worth $70 billion, that earns $10 billion a year. So basically it's a concerted international crime for which no one is being held accountable.
Now, as we discussed at the beginning of the show, the point of talking about this questionable settlement was to illustrate just how imbalanced our justice system is. That is, how differently the US penal system treats a crime depending entirely on who committed it. To make this point, I'm going to return to a story that we reported on a few weeks ago with a breaking news update. It's a development regarding the struggles of a cop watcher named Blind Justice that will show exactly what I'm talking about when I say we have two systems of justice. As you may recall, Blind Justice, a disabled veteran who monitors government agencies for compliance with legally required accommodations for the disabled, was arrested outside of Madison, North Carolina courthouse earlier this month for failure to appear for trial. The charges stemmed from his unwillingness to provide identification to a police officer. As you can see in this video, the arrest occurred when he was in fact trying to enter the courthouse. However, Blind Justice wanted to bring his camera and other aids which help overcome his disability because he is legally blind. But this decision led to his arrest, as you can see here, after which the judge imposed a $50,000 cash-only bail. All of this stemming from an unremarkable encounter with a cop when he and his wife were accosted in a church parking lot for playing Pokemon Go. And to help understand what we're watching and the consequences for him, I'm joined by Blind Justice. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So how did you get out of jail? You had to postpone, right? How much did you have to pay for your freedom?
Interesting you asked how much to get out of jail. They actually transferred me from jail for free. They told me they're taking me to a doctor because I was having a migraine, and I didn't find out until a day or two after I was in a different location, that they had moved me to a maximum security prison, and I had no contact with the outside world. And so Mrs. Justice, my partner, she was trying to figure out how to get me out, and she had to hand deliver $50,000 in U.S. currency. Like they wouldn't take anything else. So she literally had to take out a personal loan to get $50,000 from a bank, and she went to 3 different banks to get enough currency because they don't have that kind of cash. So she put it in a backpack and took it to the jail late at night on a Friday night. And luckily she had a friend that was kind of with her to help try to be a bodyguard, and they counted it by hand. The magistrate had to count $50,000 by hand twice, and she said they marked each bill, checking for counterfeit bills. And even then, um, it wasn't until after all that was done, then they dispatched the guy to go pick me up. And it's like an hour and a half to hour and 45-minute drive. So she still had to wait another, I think it was 4 hours in total before they brought me back from the prison to the jail. And then they, were forcing me to sign some stuff, and then told me that I would be on house arrest the remainder of the time before court.
So you just got out of prison and you were placed there for failure to appear at court. But this video we're looking at shows that you were at the courthouse. Can you explain why you were arrested?
This court date was for a charge of resisting an officer, and I think we may have talked together about that in the past. And I was sitting in the same seat I'm in now in my van as a passenger. They arrested me on the basis of me not providing an ID. And there's no statute anywhere in the state that says that a passenger in a car has to give ID. That was the court date we were trying to go to that. The judge previously had threatened me with contempt of court if I went to court and used my assistive technology that I use all the time. And so there's a list of different things that they just outright denied, and denied my use to take notes, my ability to take notes, and to have access to my notes, to have my phone reads documents. So I couldn't, read any of the documents. I tried going to that court date on the 6th of October, and was stopped at the door, physically stopped by deputies. I was right behind my attorney. They allowed my attorney in. Before him going in, they said, "Hey, we'll only communicate with you. We're not going to communicate with him anymore." And so they wouldn't even tell me why they would not let me in. At that time, I had a pending clarification before the judge about access to the court, about what he's exactly not allowing in, how that process is going to go. And that went unresponded. So the judge never responded to that. And the deputies weren't willing to talk to me about what the ruling is or what I can and can't have. They just said I couldn't go in. My attorney went in. A few minutes later, a captain from the sheriff's department, I think by the name of Bolins, comes out and says, "Hey, I have a warrant for your arrest, failure to appear," and they arrested me.
We are in the middle of a pandemic, a time when a large number of people agree that people shouldn't be sent to jail unless they are a serious threat to public safety. Why do you think you were sent to prison, and what was your experience like?
You know, and I'm in agreement that we don't need to be incarcerating people unless they're a real immediate threat, you know, to the safety of the public. And not only was this a class 2 misdemeanor, and was this, you know, I have no prior record, but in North Carolina, that puts me in a sentencing bracket where, if found guilty, they can't even sentence me to jail time, which means they they can't force me to pay a ransom. They can't force me to pay a bond. They can't hold me in jail by their own sentencing protocol, even if there wasn't a pandemic going on, right? So it's just, I don't know. It it's really baffling. It shocked my attorney. He told us that in 15 years of practice, he's never had anything like this. He's never seen this level of contempt from the judge, just for the Constitution and the rights of the people.
You went to your court date. What were the formal charges, and what was the ruling? What are you being asked to do?
It was crazy because the state produced 3 witnesses, 2 officers, and supposed tipster who flagged down the officer, to inform him that a van was in a parking lot. And all 3 of them swore that they did not see any crime. All that they swore, the only facts that they swore to, was that they saw a van in a parking lot of a church at night. But they denied seeing any crime. So they didn't have any factual basis for the charges. Nobody argued that they had reasonable articulable suspicion. Nobody argued that they had probable cause. The defense, or the prosecution didn't touch that at all. And the prosecution, in his argument at the end, supplied a case to the court, which is Helen v. North Carolina. And in that, he referenced from that case that it's okay for officers to make mistakes. So the prosecution's whole argument was, it's okay for the officers to make mistakes. And then he closed with, the defendant showed a lack of basic respect for law enforcement. That was the prosecution's case. And the judge made a ruling. His verdict was guilty. And he didn't cite any facts of the case. He didn't cite that they had RAS, that it was a good stop, anything. He just basically echoed the prosecution and saying that, yeah, we're going to teach you to respect law enforcement. And so the sentencing was 12 months supervised probation, 10 days community service, and they're mandating that I write apology letters to all the officers involved. So the defense argued that, hey, you guys have already illegally incarcerated this man, like, for that you couldn't, the sentence doesn't hold any jail time because of the sentencing bracket, but you've already held him for, it was 20 days when you include the 4 days of jail, 10 days of prison time, and 6 days of house arrest. And the judge didn't care. He's like, no.
I know this has been a burden to you, your family, mentally, physically, financially, and even psychologically. All of this over you not providing ID. What does this tell you about the criminal justice system?
It's very enlightening. You know, it shows the world that this is a policing for profit state, that it's a revenue generating system, you know, the prison industrial complex, and they don't care about treating people humanely, or they don't even care about the Constitution that all of these officers swore to uphold. Not just the law enforcement officers, but the officers of the court, right? The officers in the jail, like all these people swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, and with that is the Bill of Rights. And it's just, at every turn, it's just words, you know. It doesn't mean anything to them, and it's sad because I don't know where we go from here.
So let's review our tale of 2 justice systems. Blind justice exercises his constitutional right. He does not commit fraud, larceny, or theft. He literally does not plunder the wealth of a poor nation. He does not bribe foreign officials to net $600 million. Instead, he just refuses to comply with a questionable order from a cop, a subtle and unremarkable defiance of state authority. But as a result, He is jailed before his day in court. His freedom is priced at roughly $50,000 cash, and his family is forced to purchase his release for a victimless crime. Now, what happened to the executives of Goldman Sachs, whose emails revealed they intentionally invaded the law in order to enrich themselves, who stole enough money through fraud and deception to make themselves rich for generations? Well, nothing. Not a single executive of the multi-billion-dollar firm will spend a minute in jail. Not a single employee has had to post bond, hire a lawyer, or face vexing choices between freedom and financial ruin. Instead, the firm simply purchased their way out. And what did it cost? Well, for these wealthy bankers, practically nothing. That's because the heavily touted $2.9 billion fine amounted to roughly just 25% of the firm's 2019 profits. In fact, the money the company paid to buy their way out of criminal liability is just a fraction of its roughly $70 billion market value. It sounds odd to call a couple $billion pocket change, but for this particular group of uber rich, the shoe certainly fits. Which brings me back to the theme of this show, how our country's addiction to prison and punishment is not universally applied, and how our penchant for using an arrest as a tool for social compliance has intriguing limits. It's clear that the zero tolerance policies and the lock them up philosophy that has dominated our political discourse generally applies to those who can't afford to avoid it. That our expansive prison system only has room for those without the means to buy their way out. Let's remember one of the favorite mantras of the political establishment is that no one is above the law, a concept that both the powerful and the privileged are subject to the same structures as all of us. It's an idea that's supposed to embody our country's reverence for a legal system that is fair, impartial, and blind in its distribution of justice. But if that's true, how do we explain this tale of two punishments? How do we reconcile an investment bank that bought its freedom with a disability rights activist that had to give all that he had just to earn house arrest? How do we justify the constant churn of roughly 10 million arrests a year, the wasteful war on drugs, or the mandatory minimum sentences for possessing a small piece of cocaine or a joint of marijuana? How is it possible that those simple crimes of possession can lead to decades in jail, while the wholesale fleecing of a nation results in not a single minute behind bars? Well, we can't. We can't reconcile or rationalize these incongruous outcomes. We can't, because we shouldn't. I would like to thank my guest, Blind Justice, for taking the time to speak with us today. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank intrepid reporter Stephenjanis for his writing, editing, and research on this piece. Thank you, Stephen.
Tay, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And of course, I have to thank friend of the show, Noli D, for her support. Thanks, Noli D. And I want you watching to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please share it with us and we might be able to investigate. Please reach out to us. You can email us tips privately at par@therealnews.com and share your evidence of police misconduct. You can also message us at Police Accountability Report on Facebook or Instagram, or at Eyes on Police on Twitter. And of course, you can message me directly at Teas Baltimore on Twitter and Facebook. And please like and comment. I do read your comments, appreciate them, and try to answer your questions whenever I can. My name is Taya Graham, and I am your host of the Police Accountability Report. Please be safe out there.